The early game in TFT is all about setting yourself up for success in the rest of the game. There are many ways of doing this, and we'll cover all of that in this video by going over how to win in loss streak, when and what items to make, and then I'll cover some of the strongest early game openers that transition well into other comps. At the start of the game, everyone is short on money, and we need a lot of money to hit our late game comps and carries. Therefore, one of the goals in the early game is to build up a strong economy. This is done by focusing on our interest points, and also by having a continuous streak. Hitting your interest points of 10, 20, 30 gold and so on is going to be important regardless of how you are streaking. The earlier you start hitting interest gold, the better. Since the more money you have, the easier it is to get more money later. Streaking works the same way. If you have a continuous streak, you will get more money each turn, allowing you to get more interest gold, which results in even more money next turn. Good economy management paired with streaking can snowball very fast, so let's take a look at how to win a streak first. Win streaking is all about playing a strong early game board to win as many consecutive rounds as possible. The ideal scenario is to have a 5 win streak coming into Krugs. This gives us 5 gold from winning 5 rounds and 10 gold from the 5 win streak. Win streaking can only be achieved by playing a strong early game board, meaning you have many 2-star units, synergies that fit well together, while also making items to further increase your board power. If you have 1 cost pairs, it is advised to stay level 3. Because the shop odds for 1 costs are higher there, and the difference between having 0 2-star units and having 2 2-star units can decide early game fights. If you have 2 cost pairs or need a 3 cost champion, you should pre-level to 4 on 1-4. Make sure to also be leveling in the early game when win streaking. Playing an extra unit will give you a lot more power, especially when it gives you bonus synergies. These intervals are to be level 4 on 2-1 and level 5 on 2-5. If you did all this properly, you should be level 5 on Krugs with 30 gold or more in the bank. Loss streaking is what you do in situations where you can't put together a win streak board. In that case, the goal is similar by having at least 40 gold by Krugs. To do this, you want to be making interest gold very early on so we can start snowballing. Make sure to not hold on to unimportant units, and if you are holding units on your bench, you need a good reason for it. You also generally want to avoid leveling in the early game, as you want to save up some of the gold towards interest. Sometimes you can also sell off pairs to make interest gold. This can be a bit risky, as it might be harder to end the loss streak later, and with this strategy you will lose a lot of HP. But the most important thing to understand with loss streaking is that you're sacrificing your HP for gold and better carousel items. The extra gold and better items will allow you to get strong later in the game, which is usually on stage 3-2, where you can roll at level 6, or on stage 3-5, where you can do a level 7 all-in to turn around the game. Another way of loss streaking is to hold on to as many pairs as possible, and when you get them 2-starred, you transition into a win streak. Here, you only use lose streaking as a strategy until you can transition it into a win streak. Things don't always go as planned in TFT though, as sometimes you will break your streak on accident. That's called mixed streaking, and it's what you will be doing in most of your games. In that scenario, you want to focus on your interest points, as you won't be getting much gold from streaks anymore, but you don't want to ignore streaks entirely. Once your streak is broken, most of the time you want to try and play into it. For example, if you tried to loss streak and you lost 2-1 and 2-2, but ended up winning 2-3, now you most likely want to try and win 2-5 and 2-6 to play into your streak. Therefore, you can level to 5 on 2-5 to increase your odds of winning there. But you also have to assess the situation. If you accidentally won a round because you fought against the weakest player in the lobby, you are still incredibly weak compared to the other players. Then you most likely won't win by just leveling to 5 the next turn, so in that case, just take the L and focus on interest gold instead. The most important thing to understand about streaking is that it's one of the 2 main ways of generating gold, which is a scarce resource in the early game. Therefore, the one thing you want to avoid at all costs in the early game is ping-ponging, which means you are in a win-loss, win-loss, win-loss situation. In that case, you're gaining no gold from streaking and losing out on 5 to 10 gold in the early game as a result of that. If you want to learn more about economy management, check out my economy guide where I go in-depth on that subject. Items are a core part of TFT, and making the correct items will give you large power spikes. Knowing this, a big mistake a lot of players make is to be very greedy with their items, resulting in them having a ton of item components left on the bench. That's a lot of potential power not being used. In the early game, we want to use these items to generate more power. This is especially important if we want to win streak. The only issue is that we do not have access to our late game carry yet, but that's where item carriers come in. Item carriers are typically 1 or 2 cost units that can use the same type of items as your late game carry. For example, Talon is a great item carrier for Viego, as the two of them can use the same type of items. Another example is Fiora, who is a great item carrier for Bel'Veth. In the early game, we put our late game carry items on our early game carries, and their job is to hold and use these items so we don't lose out on power, hence the name item carriers. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of before you make items on your early game carries though. The most important thing is who is going to be your carry in this game, and what type of items they need. Say you want to play Samira carry this game. Her best in slot items are Last Whisper, Giant Slayer, and Deathblade. You can make any of these items as you know you need them later. Do you have a good champion that can use those items right? For example, if you want to make Deathcap, but you don't have a single champion that can use it well right now on your board, then it's generally better to wait, or make an extra item, or make an item you can use with one of the rods. The third thing is, how will you making this item affect the rest of your items later in the game? For example, if you want to make Bramble Vest for your tank, but you know you need an Edge of Night later, then it might not be as good to make the Bramble Vest, as you will have to get another Chain Vest later. But if you don't need any more Chain Vests for your late game carry, then it's great to slam Bramble Vest, as you're gaining more power onto your board and not disrupting your late game carry items. The final question you need to ask yourself is, how will this item limit your options later? For example, if you slam Deathblade, you are pretty much forcing yourself to play an AD carry that game. It's good to limit your options to a certain extent in TFT, as having too many options in no direction usually results in an 8th place. Limiting yourself to only playing AD carries in the early game is fine, as there are still a ton of options within that tree, and all late game AD carries can use Deathblade well. Augments are another crucial part of the game. They can give you a power spike while also providing direction on what combo you should play. Choosing the correct one, especially early on, is essential for getting a good placement. There are some augments that are stronger when you're trying to win streak, and there are some that are better when you're trying to loss streak. However, any augment can be used for any type of playstyle. With win streaking, you usually want to pick an augment that gives you instant board power. These can include specific trait augments like Brawler, Heart, or Crest, or it can be a general combat augment like Thrill of the Hunt, Sunfire Board, or Cybernetic Implants. When you take a combat augment, make sure that it can fit on your current board while also fitting on your future board. For example, if you are playing Spellslingers and you get offered Luden's Echo, this augment instantly gives you a boost to your combat strength while also pointing you in the direction of playing an AP comp. Some augments can fit equally well in both playstyles. There are some augments that can provide you with either combat strength or economy. True 2's or 3's Company are perfect examples of this. With these augments, you can decide whether you want to use them for improving your board, or you can sell the champion to get more economy. When lose streaking, you want to aim for augments that save you HP or give you economy. Augments like Calculated Loss, Consistency, AFK, Rich Get Richer, or Metabolic Accelerator are all great augments for this type of play. However, these augments have the drawback in the later stages of the game. Your board won't be as strong as someone who took a combat-related augment, so consider your options before picking these augments. The last thing I want to touch on before we get into the best early game openers is how to actually make a strong board. Making a strong board is something you want to do in both loss streak and win streak situations. If you're playing a loss streak, you want to lose, but you don't want to get rolled every fight. Therefore, we want to build boards that make our losses as small as possible to preserve as much HP as possible. We do this by playing units that have high damage against single targets. On the right side of this board, there are 1 and 2 cost carries that deal a lot of damage to single targets. These will be excellent to play if you need to kill individual units. On the other side are carries that deal damage to multiple units, or to different units with every cast. Since we will be weak when we're loss streaking, focusing all our damage into one champion will make it more likely that we kill that champion to save HP. But if we dealt a bunch of damage to the enemy team overall but didn't kill any of the individual champions, then we would be losing out on a lot more HP per loss. When it comes to building strong win streak boards, things are a little different. In that case, we want to build a board that has the highest likelihood of winning rounds, and not of killing individual units. To make a strong board in the early game, the most important thing you need is a strong frontline. This is because there are few units in the early game that bypass a strong frontline. The only ones being Yuumi, Draven, and Talon. There are 3 core frontline directions you can take in the early game. You have Brawler, Defender, and Mascot. Once you have a strong frontline, you need a strong backline that can deal damage behind your tanks. Ideally, you want the frontline and backline champions to line up in terms of shared synergies, but overall, it's better to play 2 stars over synergies in the early game when your only goal is to win rounds. Now, let's talk about the strongest early game boards of set 8. First up, we have Talon carry. You either play this with Ox Force or with Admin. Both of these will be complementary traits to Renegade. Talon uses AP and crit items like Jewel Gauntlet, Hodge, or Archangels extremely well, and any of the other 3 units can hold your frontline items. How you play from there depends on what comp you want to play into, but since we have Renegade and Ox Force, a lot of the time it will be best to pivot into Viego carry in the late game. To make that a reality, your mid game with this comp wants to look something like this. Here we play 4 Ox Force to buff up Talon even more, or if you manage to get a good effect from the admin trait, your board can look like this. The second board is quite flexible with Lux, Lulu, or Yuumi as your item carrier. You can either play Gadgetean Lux, Star Guardian Lux, Star Guardian Yuumi, or Gadgetean Yuumi or Lulu. All these use AP and mana generating items like Deathcap or Sojin. However, AP items synergize better with Lux and the Spellslinger trait. Mana generating items synergize better with the Heart trait, because the more times Heart units cast their spells, the more AP the whole team gets. Tank items go on the frontliner you 2-star first. The most common pivot from this board is Talia carry. You can play other AP carries like Asol or MF as well. In the mid game, you want to play around this board. This is the same for every strat, because these units complement each other nicely. We have a solid frontline with Poppy, Rell, and Annie, and a strong backline with Lulu, Lux, and Yuumi. Another AP board you can play is Anima Squad with Jinx carry. She can use similar items to the previously mentioned Lux, that's items like Sojin, Deathcap, Archangels, or JG. You put your tank items on Silas or Galio, and this board plays very nicely into a 5 Anima Squad MF as your carry, but you can also play into other carries like Asol or Talia. In the mid game, you want to find and play 5 Anima Squad as it gives you a good damage boost, and also you get more Anima units in, which gives you a better chance to stack up the trait. You can also swap out Galio for a Brawler or Defender. Moving on to AD boards, we have Ashe as your item carrier. We play 3 Laser Corps with her, and we also have a better frontline as we add in a Brawler as the 4th unit. She can take AD and attack speed items like Rageblade, Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, Deathblade, or Hurricane. Then you put your tank items on Blitz because we want to move them to another unit in the mid game. This opener can lead you into playing Zed with Laser Corps, but you can also consider playing Bel'Veth, Vayne, or Samira, as all those 4 units use similar items. Your mid game board should look something like this, where we play Riven instead of Blitzcrank, and you also add in Vayne for both Recon and Duelist. Next up is Sivir carry. This board only has 3 units that synergize, and you can add in a 4th unit based on whatever you need, whether it be damage or frontline. Similarly to Ashe, she can use AD and attack speed items well. Last Whisper, i.e. Deathblade and Rageblade all work great on her. This board transitions nicely into a Samira carry board. Other carries you can play from here are Bel'Veth, Zed, or Vayne. You want to play around this board in the mid game for that comp. And another version that also works is this. Draven is also a great early game carry. The board we play with him on level 4 can look something like this. With Draven, you don't want to play mech until level 6, because you have to sacrifice 2 units that could act as your frontline instead of getting sacrificed. But in the mid game, you want to play a board like this. His items are the same as the past 2 champions, so Rageblade, Last Whisper, Deathblade, and IE. From there, you can pivot into the usual comps like Zed, Samira, Bel'Veth, or Vayne. Our last ranged AD carry is Kayle. With her, you want to play Duelists with any strong frontline units. Here is an example of a Kayle board. Just like the previous 3, she also uses AD and attack speed items. If you want to stick to Duelist, then you can play Vayne from here, but any of the 4 AD carries I mentioned before can also work. Mid-game boards are extremely flexible with Kayle, but here's an example where we play 4 Duelists with 3 supers to boost the damage of our Kayle. The AD Bruiser type carries in the set are Fiora and Camille. Both use the item combo BT and Titans really well, which is also the best combination for Bel'Veth. A Fiora board looks like this, where you play 2 Duelists and 2 Ox Force. With Camille, we play Admin and also 3 Renegades to give her more damage. Renekton is also an AD Bruiser type of champion, and he can work as an item carrier with a board like this, or like this. Because his ability gives him damage based on his health, he can carry with both AD and tank items. Warmog, Sunfire, BT, and Titans all work great on him. Depending on what items you have made on him, your options can be to play one of the AD comps I mentioned for the previous boards, Or if you have made tank items, you can play towards any comp in the game and won't be limited too much by your items. In the mid game, you want to aim for a board like this. Here we play 4 brawlers with 3 laser corps to give more damage into our Renekton and make him even more tanky. We swap out Blitzcrank for Riven because she's overall stronger and more useful unit. If you hit Jax early and you have Sustain, which can be items like BT or augments like Celestial Blessing, then you can play Mech on level 4 with a board like this. But you have to fulfill both conditions because otherwise you're making yourself weaker compared to the other boards, as your Jax won't be able to sustain and he'll just slowly get bursted down. If you hit both Ezreal and Vi, you can also play Underground. This is the economy trait of the set, and it's similar to Fortune in set 4 or Mercenaries in set 6. How you play this trait is complicated as you can both win and loss streak with it, so I will make a guide on how to play Underground in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want cheat sheets for any of my comp guides, they're available for YouTube members and patrons, and links to those are in the description. And if you want to get better at TFT, join the Discord. We got over 9,000 other players there who are hungry to climb. And if you want to get coached by me, the information is over on the Discord server as well. So take care and see you in the next video.